Abraham Maslow's The Further Reaches of Human Nature, more precisely the chapter Neurosis as a Failure of Personal Growth. So not only the most important book that I've read, but the most important chapter I've read arguably in my entire life, after studying psychology and philosophy every single day for around 6 years. Why this chapter? Why this book? Let me explain. First, the word neurosis is a word that we don't use often nowadays, so maybe that might be problematic, and maybe that's why the title of this chapter itself doesn't land entirely. So let's say right away that neurosis, although it has many different meanings, and we will argue by discussing the book that maybe it's a word that we shouldn't even use. When we talk about neurosis, we are talking about what today you would call mental health problems, or in more extreme or more severe cases, mental health illness. So neurosis as a failure of personal growth. Maybe you're already starting to figure out what this is all about. But just quick context. Abraham Maslow, the pioneer of humanistic psychology, one of the most important psychologists of 20th century. Now, I will not be giving you the whole backstory on Abraham Maslow and discussing his work in its entirety, because I think that deserves a video of its own, and we would be kind of getting away from the topic of this specific book, The Further Reaches of Human Nature, one of his overlooked works. And I will say again, not just the most important book that I've read in my life, but arguably the most underrated psychology book of the 20th century. And all psychology books, all important psychology books of 20th century are far, far more impactful than those of 21st century. So that should say something about how important this book is. It is a collection of his writings, so it's not a book that was written as a one coherent whole. It is a collection of writings and lectures by Abraham Maslow. Not the entirety of this book is relevant to general population. Some of it, or a lot of the book, addresses psychologists, therapists, or future psychologists and therapists, educators, teachers. So what Abraham Maslow was trying to do with the previous book as well, Toward a Psychology of Being, and then continued with The Further Reaches of Human Nature, is to bring about a revolution in psychology and in therapy. The project of bringing about that revolution as part of the movement of humanistic psychology is again something that will take an hour or 3 hours or a whole series of videos to discuss. So to focus on what could be of benefit to you in this book and why the chapter Neurosis as a failure of personal growth. Well, what if one of the greatest psychologists of the 20th century was able to convince you that what today we call mental health problems or even mental health illness could be signs of psychological and spiritual health? How about that? How about you understanding that anxiety, depression, obsessive disorders, panic, self-hatred, self-judgment could all be signs of a clumsy movement towards greater psychological health? So let's open with a quote. The frame of reference taken for granted today considers neurosis to be, from one aspect, a describable pathological state of affairs which presently exists, a kind of disease or sickness or illness on the medical model, says Maslow. So that is how we view it today. Unfortunately, Maslow's attempted revolution in psychology and therapy wasn't very successful. So let's say that today we view mental health problems or neurosis the same. Disease or sickness or illness on the medical model. But we have learned, says Maslow, who are we in this context? Him and his colleagues who engaged in the founding and trying to move forward excuse me, humanistic psychology. But we have learned to see neurosis also in a dialectical fashion as simultaneously a kind of moving forward, a clumsy groping toward health and toward fullest humanness. Fullest humanness. Let's stop at that. Maslow proposes throughout the book, especially throughout the beginning of the book, that terms psychological health and psychological or mental illness or neurosis should be terms that we stop using. Instead of psychological health, he proposes full humanness. And instead of neurosis or mental illness, he proposes human diminution. And I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly because I don't see that word being used anywhere else. So human diminution, hopefully you can read it. And maybe someone can correct me in the comments if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. Full humanness. Why is that more appropriate than psychological health? Because Maslow says at the point when he's writing this, and this is in the 70s of the previous century, already psychology has been for a while moving in a direction of just being satisfied with what he says normalcy, meaning let's quote unquote fix troubled humans to the point where they can operate normally in a society. And that's it. That's where the project of psychology and therapy would stop. Now you can think if that has changed. I'm not sure. And he proposes that is not what our aim should be. All humans are capable of so much more. So the term psychological health, if we look around us in the world, people who are called psychologically healthy or normal are not really exemplars of what life could be like, are not really exemplars of what human beings could be like, what human beings could achieve. So he says psychological health has become this term that we are using for averageness, for normalcy, for just being able to operate and to maintain function in the society, which of course is respectable to some extent, but it's not the full extent to what a human being could be, which explains the title, The Farther Reaches of Human Nature. So he says, no, what we should be looking at is full humanness. We should look at this spectrum, not, for example, the Freudian spectrum would be, or there is no spectrum. With all due respect for what Freud gave us and the school of psychoanalysis, it deals with kind of binary. Either a human is sick, it suffers from some kind of pathological disorder and is not adjusted to the society, or a human has been well adjusted or adjusted enough to function in their life once again. So it's a binary. Maslow proposes a spectrum. Let's move toward full humanness. What would be the fullest humanness, as he says, that even neurosis or mental health problems can be perceived as moving toward your fullest humanness. What is your fullest humanness? It's the fullest expression of your unique potential and capacity. Not what society deems as the standard, not what society deems as being normal. Maslow says, forget about that. Forget about being normal in the eyes of society. Yes, we want to function, want to contribute to the society, but we want to keep moving towards our unique, individual, fullest humanness. Because every single one of us could be more than what we are right now. Every single one of us has unique capacities to be explored and expressed. That's why, instead of psychological health, he says, let's consider the term full humanness, and let's look at our development and growth on that spectrum, not from sick to normal, but from human diminution towards full humanness. Then what would be human diminution? Again, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing the word correctly. I've never heard it being used. It would be the opposite of full humanness, of course, and it would be what actually we see around us quite often, and that is unused capacities, ignored capacities, that is shrinking away from the adventure and challenge of life. He says, one consequence of this usage of full humanness rather than psychological health is the corresponding or parallel use of human diminution instead of neurosis, which is anyway a totally obsolete word, he says about neurosis, even though the chapter is titled Neurosis as a Failure of Personal Growth. Here, the key concept is the loss or not yet actualization of human capacities and possibilities. And obviously, this is also a matter of degree and quantity. So once again, it's not a binary either or, it's a spectrum, it's a degree of, it's a matter of degree and quantity. And one of the things that we can get from this book in its entirety and Maslow's work is, it's not you are self-actualized or not, it's you are moving toward self-actualization or not. And that depends on your daily actions and choices. So every single hour of your life, you have the opportunity to take a step towards self-actualization or to refuse to take a step towards self-actualization. So once again, it's not a binary, it's a journey, it's a spectrum, it's a matter of degree and quantity, quality and quantity. He said neurosis is an obsolete word because it's a word that, let me explain through the quote, but I can say right away, it's based on the old medical model. However, he titles the chapter Neurosis as a Failure of Personal Growth in order to build an argument around the word that is at that point still used. So maybe now I should say mental health problems is an obsolete term. I'm using it so that we can understand each other. But actually, what I'm trying to build is an argument that mental health problems, which our generation, or let's say our generations of the last couple of decades have been using that term, mental health problems. Maybe that's an obsolete term and we should stop using it. But the reason why I'm using it is, once again, because it helps us be on the same page regarding what we are talking about. Maslow says, this, him explaining the different usage or using the different terms such as full humanness and human diminution, he says, this is a radical move away from the medical model, a move which is long overdue, he says in the 70s, and I'm not sure if the move has been completed still to this day. Strictly speaking, neurosis means an illness of the nerves, a relic we can very well do without today. In addition, using the label psychological illness puts neurosis into the same universe of discourse as ulcers, bacterial invasions, broken bones, or tumors. So let's pause here for a moment. I remember around 10 years ago when it became such an open-minded statement, maybe at least in my country, in Montenegro, Southeast Europe, maybe for those of you watching from the Western world, maybe that was more than 10 years ago, where it became such a profound statement to say, oh, you should go to the therapist if you're having mental health problems, because dealing with mental health problems is same like having a broken bone. Well, it's not the same as having a broken bone. It's not the same as having a bacterial infection. But because we try to normalize seeking out for help, which is a beautiful movement in the overall human society and human culture, we made the mistake of putting a sign of equality between purely physical ailments and even injuries, putting equality sign between that and what is happening internally with us. But Maslow says, but by now, we have learned very well that it is better to consider neurosis as rather related to spiritual disorders, to loss of meaning, to doubts about the goals of life, to grief and anger over a lost love, to seeing life in a different way, to loss of courage or of hope, to despair over the future, to dislike for oneself, to recognition that one's life is being wasted. So pay attention, not that one's life is wasted, that one's life is being wasted, etc. This is, once again, one of the most important, most influential psychologists of the 20th century saying that what we call mental health problems, we know them, or at that point already most psychologists knew that they are related to spiritual disorders. And then he gives these examples: loss of meaning, anger over a lost love, seeing life in a different way, doubts about goals of life. Controversial opinion, right? Well, think about this. Have you experienced any of these things? Have you doubted the meaning of your life? Have you despaired over a lost love, or have been angry over a lost love? Have you been in severe doubt about the movement of your life and the goals that you have set for yourself, or the lack of goals? Have you felt the inner discomfort at realizing that you have been wasting your life? Is it not these things that often produce what we would call mental health problems? Now someone would say, no, I have been wasting my life because I have mental health problems. We can open a big discussion about it, and I will definitely be making videos about that. But now let's just say it's not only Maslow, it's Carl Jung who also said that at least a third of his patients are not suffering from any biologically driven mental health problems, but are suffering from an inadequately lived life, or being inadequately oriented towards their life. Why should this be encouraging? Because then, if we understand that this is what neurosis is related to, how you have been interacting with life, engaging in life, feedback that you're receiving from life. So this is not just putting some kind of blame on you. We have here anger over a lost love. Maybe you have been betrayed in a romantic relationship and you feel depressed. And let's not get into semantics. Oh, there is a difference between major depressive disorder and feeling depressed. There are differences. But isn't it the case that a person who is feeling depressed still considers themselves to be facing mental health problems? Well, isn't it human to be facing some kind of internal conflict, internal pain and struggle and suffering when being hit by life? Once again, why should this be encouraging? Let's go back to the beginning, when Maslow says that simultaneously we can look at neurosis as moving forward, a clumsy groping forward toward health and toward fullest humanness. Why? Because the inner conflict, the inner pain, the inner suffering signals that your life could be more, your life could be different. You want your life to be different. And this is also the project of Maslow. He says, our new way of approaching the problem of humanness is with an appreciation. Once again, he's talking about his fellow humanistic psychologists. Our new way of approaching the problem of humanness is with an appreciation of its highest possibilities and simultaneously a deep disappointment that these possibilities are so infrequently actualized. How would this fit into what we are talking about here of neurosis as a failure of personal growth? That by not engaging or failing to engage in the project of self-actualization, you are setting yourself up for neurosis. That is, you are setting yourself up for what we call today mental health problems. The good side is that these mental health problems could act as signals that something in the project of your life, something in the project of your self-actualization is being unaddressed, avoided, ignored. And that's where we can turn to Maslow's concept of the Jonah complex. Still part of the same chapter. The Jonah complex deserves a video of its own. I'm just going to touch on it to give more context to this immensely powerful and important chapter and the book. So maybe this is a first video of many of sharing the wisdom from the farther reaches of human nature. Anyway, why is the Jonah complex relevant here? Maslow says, we all have, all of us, an impulse to improve ourselves, an impulse toward actualizing more of our potentialities, toward self-actualization or full humanness or human fulfillment or whatever term you like. Granted this, then what holds us up? What blocks us? What he describes is this innate urge towards self-actualization. So all humans can be more than what they are, and all humans have an inborn, innate tendency and urge towards actualizing those potentialities, towards moving in the direction of actualizing more and more, if not 100% of their potential, because we cannot know even what 100% is. So why then, when we go out on the street, why when you go on a subway, why when you sit in a cafe, you see people who are living pretty empty lives? I would say it's a heavy statement to make, and maybe it might sound judgmental, but let's be real. When you look around yourself, especially those of you who are watching this video, the fact that you are watching this video, the fact that you stuck around up until this point, shows that you are deeply interested in human growth and human potential and human flourishing. So then I know for a fact you are the type of person who notices around yourself, and sometimes even in your friends group or in your family, that most people are not trying to become more than what they are, even if they could be. So maybe it's not such a controversial statement, at least among us who are trying to become more. One of the reasons, or one of the things that holds us back, Maslow decided to call the Jonah complex. The Jonah complex, named by the biblical character of Jonah in the Old Testament, who was given by God himself, or God itself, I don't know how you want to put it, the mission to deliver a certain prophecy. But Jonah tried to escape from that mission. He tried to avoid his calling. What happened? He got swallowed by a sea creature, a giant sea creature. Was it a whale or a sea monster? I'm not sure. And inside the belly of the whale, of the creature, he goes through a certain transformation, is eventually let out, and he goes on to fulfill his mission. But the point is that he initially resists the mission. We could also draw a parallel between the story of the Jonah, or parallel between psychological Jonah complex and the concept of the hero journey, because one of the first phases or first points of hero journey is resistance or refusal to the call to adventure. So Jonah is one of the first very straightforward examples of refusal of the call to adventure, which all of us experience this resistance. Maslow says, in my own notes, I had first labeled this defense from growth, defense from self-actualization. I have labeled it the fear of one's own greatness, or the evasion of one's destiny, or the running away from one's own best talents. It is certainly possible for most of us to be greater than what we are in actuality. We all have unused potentialities or not fully developed ones. It is certainly true that many of us evade our constitutionally suggested vocations, in parentheses, call, destiny, task in life, mission. So often we run away from the responsibilities dictated, or rather suggested, by nature, by fate, even sometimes by accident, just as Jonah tried, but in vain, to run away from his fate. Fate as in F-A-T-E, not F-A, not as religious faith, F-A-T-H, or F-A-I-T-H, something like that. I'm not a spelling bee champion, so you'll have to forgive me. Jonah tried in vain to run away from his fate, and we might try in vain to run away from our fate, from our responsibilities, from our calling, from our mission, purpose, talent. Once again, it will be in vain, and it will produce neurosis, or what we call mental health problems. Now you could say, but I don't have a talent, I don't have a special talent, I don't have a vocation, I don't have a calling, I don't have a passion. Well, here is the word responsibility. Do you have a responsibility? Do you see anything in your life that resembles a task, a challenge to take on, a responsibility to face? There is no individual existing in a vacuum. There is no individual existing in a limbo state where there is nothing to orient themselves toward, nothing to move toward, nothing to respond to. There is no such person. So all of us are faced with the project of self-actualization. All of us are faced with the project of personal growth. All of us are faced with our own hero's journey. And by refusing to engage, we are refusing the call to adventure. We are enacting our Jonah complex, and we are headed towards some form of what we would call mental health problems or neurosis, but Maslow said it would be more appropriate to say we are headed toward human diminution. We are moving away on that spectrum, we are moving away from full humanness. And I find this infinitely encouraging, because every time you move away, yes, you will suffer, but the suffering will act as a reminder to turn into the other direction and respond to the calling of your growth, respond to the challenge, respond to your hero journey. And it's just a question, are you that stubborn to just keep ignoring the signs, to keep refusing the call, to keep interpreting? And this is, now it's not just about being stubborn. This is why Maslow is important. This is why I find part of my life mission to spread more of Maslow's work. It's not just about stubbornness and fear or in refusing the call. It's also about what we have been taught. It's also about you going down this self-destructive spiral where you interpret your mental health problems as a sign of you being broken. But here I stand in front of you as someone who's been dealing with anxiety most of his life, as someone who has suffered and have experienced multiple panic attacks, but a couple of them that borderline left me detached from reality. So then, I started questioning if there were even panic attacks, went through a period of couple of years of trying to recover from what I have experienced, completely doubting my capacity to re-engage in my life in full capacity, because of thinking that I'm broken, because of not yet having encountered Maslow, or at least not yet having encountered Maslow in this form. We have all heard of Maslow in high school in his most boring form. Let me put it, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is the most boring part of his work, especially the way that it's taught in schools. So once again, I stand here in front of you as someone who thought that he was broken, someone who thought that he was messed up in some way. And maybe I'm messed up in certain ways, but Maslow's work helped me, alongside with other great psychologists from the school of, or the broader category of depth psychology, humanistic psychology, existential psychology, taught me that what we are experiencing and perceiving as mental health problems are usually signs of not answering a certain challenge, task, mission, call, occasion that is in front of us. Neurosis is a failure of personal growth. Let's try to rephrase it and say neurosis is a failure to engage in the project of personal growth. That's what it's about. And this is, friends, the most important, probably the most important chapter I've read in my life because of how it influenced my private life, my mental, psychological, spiritual health, my creative work, my intellectual work. This book and this chapter is a big part of why now, 6 years later, I'm following my passion, or 6 years later, I have been on the journey of following my passion, my calling, which is writing, teaching, helping people, working with people, getting the chance to know people from all parts of the world, getting chance to meet the most interesting, amazing humans. And all humans are interesting. Spoiler alert, all humans are interesting. All humans are incredible if given a chance to express themselves. And I have been living my journey. I have been living my mission largely because of this book and this chapter that I discussed with you. I'm hoping, actually, let me cross that. I'm not hoping. I will be creating more videos on Maslow's work, on this book, specifically on the Jonah complex, but also I will need your feedback. What do you want me to talk about? Maybe something specific from this video to expand on, to dive deeper into. Maybe you need some more context on the humanistic psychology, more context on Maslow. Maybe there is another topic that you want me to discuss. Here are some of the other books that have influenced me, or some of them that I'm reading currently. And yeah, once again, I'm more than willing to keep responding my call to adventure, my call to my journey, to keep responding to my mission and vocation. So say what you're interested in and let's discuss it. But more importantly than that, than you giving feedback to me, although I do want it, is for you to take a moment after this video, sit with yourself for at least 1 minute, and just ask yourself, what would it look like? Or how would my behavior and engagement with the world be different if I took on this new attitude of responding to my project of personal growth, to my journey of self-actualization, to my hero journey? Ask yourself that, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.